All right, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from RicoScores. And man, I know this is a question that a lot of y'all are thinking about, and I've definitely been thinking about it lately. Is Carolina Panthers edge rusher Brian Burns actually available right now? Is there any real chance that the Commanders could actually land him in free agency? Are the Panthers just simply going to end up franchise tagging them to where we have no chance of getting them? But you never know, because right now, contract talks are far apart, and they've literally stopped since an update that we got a couple of days ago at the Combine. We're going to talk about that. Also, we're going to talk about what his potential asking price and contract projection may end up being, and like what his market value is, how much we potentially have to pay him, how much the Panthers will have to pay him on the franchise tag if they end up actually using that on him. Do the Washington Commanders actually have enough cap space to pay Brian Burns if we want to, along with also spending money in other positions, most notably like tackle or maybe even tight end? Also, is Washington the favorite to land the top tier edge rusher? Also, is edge rusher the Commanders' arguably biggest need, and do we need to do whatever it takes to get a guy like a Brian Burns? And we're also, of course, going to talk about the tension between Brian Burns and the Panthers and why it may lead to them actually parting ways and the Panthers not even feeling like it's worth franchise tagging him over. We're going to dive into his exit interview after the last game of this past 2023 season and everything that we've heard from both sides so far since the offseason has started. So we're going to dive into all that and more. But before we do, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned. I'm working on that mock draft. I'm almost done. I've made all of my picks, but I like to have my stats and everything ready to go as well. So once I get that done, that mock draft will be out. That will more than likely happen sometime later tonight. So stay tuned because it's a trade back mock draft. So stay tuned for that. We're of course also going to highlight a lot of the combine standouts, the guys that tested the best at their respective positions, especially positions that we need for the Commanders from that combine in that trade back mock draft. So it's kind of going to like double up as like a two-goal video in one video. So stay tuned for that, and let's go ahead and get to it, man. Let's get it. All right, so most recently we saw a report March 3rd, literally yesterday. Oh my lord, that felt like that was more than just yesterday. That's crazy. But Josina Anderson tweeted, "I'm told the Panthers informed Brian Burns during the combine this past week that they aren't continuing contract talks at this time per source." And then everybody else came out and also reported the same thing as well. And first of all, let's go ahead and get this out the way. Shouts out to everybody on Twitter for pointing this out, that the Panthers declining 2 first-round picks for him might have been one of the biggest trade fumbles in NFL history. Remember what Dave Tepper declined a while back? The Rams offered their 2023 second-round pick, their 2024 first-round pick, and their 2025 first-round pick straight up basically for just one full season of Brian Burns. And basically, Scott Barnett said, "I hope those 8 sacks in your 2-win season was worth it, Panthers fans." And that's crazy, man. 2 first and a second for just 1 year? I'm pretty sure the Panthers would beg for somebody to give them that type of trade value in return for a Brian Burns right now. But let's go back a little bit further. That was the most recent thing, and we'll circle back to that later. But let's go all the way back, because it was reported that the Panthers planned on franchise tagging him a couple of weeks back, but there may be too much tension and the Panthers may not end up actually going through with it, because it just may not be worth it to just have this disgruntled employee on your team that you're forcing to stay here. Going back to Josina Anderson again, all the way back on February 21st, she dropped like a bombshell on the internet, a very long tweet that we're going to break down. I mean, Lord have mercy, a whole article on Twitter basically. What's the need for all of these other websites when Adrian Wojnarowski and Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, and all those guys basically put out entire articles on Twitter like this? But let's go ahead and get to her tweet. It's very interesting that the Carolina Panthers are currently electing not to give Brian Burns a new contract in his preferred range. Burns' target figure, likely based in production, being a franchise and community face, and the annual financial growth of the league. You got to account for cap space being increased. Again, already did a full breakdown about how the salary cap increasing doesn't necessarily help the Commanders, because even though we gained more money in our cap space, is based on percentages, and players want a certain percentage more so than like a specific number. So that didn't really help us much anyway. So basically, since the salary cap increased, Brian Burns is expecting more money per year in his next deal anyway. But going back to Brian Burns' target figure, is still well below Nick Bosa's average of $34 million per year. Very noteworthy. We don't exactly know what it is, but she's saying that whatever he's asking for is well below $34 million per year. So he's not even trying to reset the market like a lot of guys do once they hit the open market. Regardless of position, guys typically try to reset the market, even if they look around and they know that I'm not better than the guy that I'm potentially trying to get paid more money for. When every free agency, every offseason comes around, people try to become the highest paid player of their respective position, even knowing that they aren't better than the guy that they're getting paid more money for. It's just the way the NFL contracts work, because within 2 years, you're not going to be the highest paid. You probably may not even necessarily be top 10 highest paid in your respective position. So you go get the money while you can, and then the league resets itself, the cap space increases, other people reset the market after you, and then now you were the highest paid, say for Brian Burns situation, edge rusher for like maybe a day or a week, and then soon after that, especially within just an entire offseason, especially after 2, you're no longer the highest paid guy. But even beyond that, he doesn't even want to be the highest paid edge rusher, and she said well below 34 million. So we could definitely assume that it's somewhere below 30 million at the very least, maybe somewhere in the mid-20s per year. And she also went on to tweet, a top of the market metric set under the cap threshold for last season, because that's what Nick Bosa got. The Panthers already assigned additional value to Burns when they also reportedly rejected a trade offer for a minimum of 2 first-round picks in 2022 for him, around the same time that the team dealt Christian McCaffrey, which goes back to why them declining that trade earlier was terrible. First of all, that was unique value that they could only get in that point in time, and it's just crazy that they assumed that declining that trade and keeping him, maybe if they draft Bryce Young, they could turn this around and be Super Bowl contenders. I guess they were banking on the fact that, we pay Brian Burns long term, Bryce Young becomes what CJ Stroud ended up becoming, and they go from top draft pick to winning the division and going to the playoffs. It didn't work out at all. But going back to the trade, it's even crazier that they didn't accept it, because first of all, now they would never be able to get that value for him in any trade. First of all, he's not even on roster. So even if you franchise tag him, you still won't be able to get that type of trade, I'm pretty sure. And then on top of that, you declining that trade lets everybody know what his perceived value is as far as money goes. And that includes Brian Burns especially, because Brian Burns is looking like, well, I was worth more than 2 first-round picks at minimum. So that if you're looking around the league and trying to basically equate value of picks to money, it sounds like I'm worth more money than whatever franchise tag you'll potentially put on me, on whatever money that you're offering me per year as of right now in contract talks, which again, I want to emphasize, has officially ended right now. The Panthers have put that on hold as of the combine. They're like, we're no longer interested even talking money with you right now. You're not even priority. We'll get to that later. Continuing with Josina Anderson's tweet, the idea for any team, including the 2-15 Carolina Panthers, is to retain its best players, especially in a scenario where a starting quarterback is on a rookie deal. And that rookie deal window is when that's really your best Super Bowl window. A top quarterback, which Bryce Young is nowhere near right now, but just from the Panthers' point of view, best case scenario, Bryce Young turns out to be elite. Of course, you would prefer to have your quarterback being paid ridiculous money value, like just absolutely nothing, just pennies based on production because he's on a rookie deal, and then you're able to pay guys like your top edge rusher and Brian Burns and maybe your top offensive lineman, because now you have that cap space because your top quarterback is on a rookie deal and you're a Super Bowl contender because of it. It's a big gamble, but it tends to pay off for some teams, and then for the Panthers situation, it doesn't. Moving on, in my mind, from Josina Anderson again, the Panthers should be considering how Burns could react to the expected tag, and in any potential aftermath if a tag and trade doesn't come to pass. I'm sure the Panthers can already visualize that the picture potentially looks like, as I'm equally sure they'd remiss to accept any compensation less than the deal rejected in 2022. Boy, they better. If they franchise tag Brian Burns and somebody's willing to offer them any value at this point, I know there's a certain minimum that you require, but there's no way they're expecting more than what the Rams offered last year with that. Man, that was ridiculous. They turned that down. Lastly, the Panthers' own players are likely to be observing how Burns is currently being handled as future free agents. As I've underlined repeatedly, the energy and morale in the building is just as important as it is detectable, and that's very important. We as Commanders fans noticed this when we were talking about, are we going to pay Deron Payne long-term, Jonathan Allen long-term, Terry McLaurin long-term? It's like if we don't pay those guys that have put in all of the work, time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears to earn it, if we don't pay those guys, then other people on the Commanders are going to pay attention to that. And even outside free agents are going to be like, well, what's the point of me going to the Commanders as a free agent? And then once my contract is up, they just don't pay their guys the money that they deserve. So what's the point of me even going there? And then also Commanders free agents, they're also looking like, hey, man, Terry McLaurin's my dog. And he did everything he was supposed to do on his end of the deal. He put in all of the work. He was productive despite all of the bad quarterback situations. And y'all don't pay him? What chance do y'all have of paying me? But also, since that's my dog, just out of spite, I'm going to leave as soon as I can, as soon as I'm a free agent, just because y'all don't do good business around here. We don't like the morale and the way this organization is being ran right now. Like, these are human beings. These are not robots. I know we talk about numbers a lot. I know we talk about a lot of stats, production, and things like that. These are human beings, and there's loyalty, there's emotions tied into this and all of that. So, Brian Burns, hey man, Carolina Panthers, y'all better handle this situation correctly, is what Josina Anderson is saying, and I completely agree. From my experience of watching hundreds of these situations unfold, direct communication is always necessary with players, especially the stars. Potentially floating offers to the press to protect optics, despite minimal contact with players, should never be the focus with any player or team, in my opinion, especially in situations where all options are knowingly on the table. The focus should always be on having good players who certifiably produce for immediate impact for the franchise. And just to go back to the point that, these little petty things where teams float out rumors out there, float out reports, and try to say things out to the media instead of directly to the players is definitely a big no-no, and it catches up with teams, man. These free agents around the NFL notice these things, man. The agents of the players and the players themselves around the NFL definitely talk. And they know, like, oh, okay, the Panthers are petty, man. They're out here floating out. I mean, just for example, they're floating this information out there to make Brian Burns look bad, to make him look selfish. Other teams and players are gonna notice this for sure. It's definitely gonna get around. And, for this instant gain and to make Brian Burns, just say, for example, look bad so that you can be able to sign him for cheaper than what he originally wanted, is gonna have long-term negative ramifications on your team, because other players are gonna notice what you did to him and be like, nah, I don't even want to go to the Panthers, and potentially end up in the same situation. So yeah, maybe you win the battle today, but you will not win the war acting like that. Again, and I'm not necessarily saying that the Panthers are doing that, but we're just basically warning them, hey, don't play that game now. Talk to Brian Burns directly. Don't try to put information out there trying to start some weird propaganda campaign to make him look like the bad guy, to force him to take a lesser deal. Don't try to play those petty, manipulative games, man. And that goes for every organization. I hope my Commanders don't try to do things like that as well, especially with a guy like a Cameron Curl. We'll see. But so far, Commanders been keeping it very classy with Cameron Curl and things like that. We'll see how this goes. And his dad actually seems pretty excited, which lets me know that maybe they're working towards something. I don't know. I'm going to work on that video as well right now, because his dad, is pretty vocal, especially on Twitter. We're going to dive into his cryptic tweet maybe in another video. But either way, moving on, February 21st, it was reported that Panthers pass rusher Brian Burns was seeking $30 million per year in a contract extension with the team. But again, Josina Anderson said that it may actually be below that. And then the Panthers on their end were reportedly willing to go as high as 5 years, $27 million per year. I'm surprised that they didn't meet there. And this is very interesting. Is this true? I'm not exactly sure if this is trustworthy information, because if the Panthers actually are willing to give him $27 million per year, I feel like that's a really good number. That's higher than what his perceived market value is as an unrestricted free agent if he were to leave the Panthers and then potentially sign with another team. So that's really interesting. Did the Panthers actually offer that, or are they just saying that? Because if they did, I'm very surprised he turned that down. So now that leads to another issue. Like, is Brian Burns telling the truth on his end? How much does he actually really want? Josina Anderson said well below $34 million per year that Nick Bosa's making. I'm assuming $27 million is somewhere in that range. For him to turn that down, I don't exactly know what to believe. Now, moving on, his exit interview that he had, of course, in the Panthers locker room after the final game of the season from the past 2023 season, he talked about a lot of things, and he was showing like a lot of personality with his answers and things like that. He was being 100% himself, smiling, laughing, joking around, even talking about like Game of Thrones and how he's never watched it, and like don't get mad at him, and I plan on watching that this off season and things like that once I finally have some free time. Like just being completely 100% transparent and a really cool guy. But when it got to the question about his potential contract extension, he said that he doesn't feel like he's a priority on their list of off-season to-dos. And this was way back before a lot of these other reports that I just gave you that are coming out like February 21st, or even the most recent one that came out just literally yesterday from the Combine. This is way back then. So this entire time, he's basically, since the final game of the season, he's felt like he's not a priority. And now that we've gotten the most recent report that they've officially just stopped contract talks, because I don't know, maybe the Panthers feel like he's being difficult. Maybe he feels like they're being cheap or whatever. But for some reason, they're not even talking right now. So that's crazy. But again, going back to his exit interview, I mean, he just seemed like, yeah, man, these guys just really don't rock with me as much as I would hope they do. So maybe he's disgruntled and maybe he wants to leave. Maybe the Panthers don't prioritize him as much as he feels like they should. And maybe they feel like they are, but maybe on his end, he's not feeling that. And hey, man, y'all got to see eye to eye for this to happen. It takes two to make a contract. And so now the question is, will the new GM value him more than the previous one did? Because remember, that exit interview was before they hired their new GM, who was technically their assistant GM already, and then they just promoted him to GM. So he was already in the building. He's already familiar with Brian Burns and vice versa. They already know each other and things like that. So maybe he will value Brian Burns more than the previous regime did. But so far, from what we're seeing from these past couple of weeks worth of reports, it sounds like he doesn't. But we'll see how this whole thing goes. We're definitely going to monitor it, because as a Commanders fan, I really, really hope that the Broncos just officially notified Russell Wilson that he will be released after the league year begins on March 13th. Oh boy. So he could just go wherever he wants to go. Falcons, Vikings, who knows? We'll see. Because sounds like Kirk Cousins trying to leave Minnesota. But either way, I just got off topic because that notification just popped up on my phone. This is chaos right now. Free agency is kicking up, man. Y'all know legal tampering period starts March 11th. It's about to be crazy within less than 2 weeks, literally, like actually a week. And then March 13th is officially the new league year and things like that. But it's about to get crazy. But going back on topic to Brian Burns, man, I'm really interested in seeing how the Panthers are going to handle this situation, because they don't have much longer. So far, it's looking like a big no for whether this new GM, who was, again, previously the assistant GM, so it's not like he's just a guy coming from some other team, from some outside place to just randomly land here. He was already there with Brian Burns the year before, and I feel like that's noteworthy. But so far, it seems like he's not valuing Brian Burns more than the previous GM in the previous regime and all of that type of stuff. But who knows? Things can change. But as of a couple of days ago, well, technically yesterday, doesn't look like it. Them boys told him, we're done talking about contracts and money with you right now. We are focusing on other things. And honestly, I'd personally be offended if I'm supposed to be one of the face of the franchise guys, a pillar in my community, very productive, despite the fact that our team sucks. We've done nothing but lose. And I'm going out there and playing my tail off and not even complaining out loud while doing it. I would feel disrespected by this, man. It kind of feels like, you BSing. We don't even want to talk to you anymore. And I'm pretty sure Brian Burns is looking like, man, I just want to be paid what I'm owed type of thing. Maybe Brian Burns is being difficult. Who knows? But from my point of view, it looks like the Panthers are the bad guy more than anything else right now. And I'm hoping that's, if anything, more importantly, that's how Brian Burns feels about the situation and does whatever it takes, going a whole defamation campaign against the Panthers to get them to just be like, it ain't even worth the headache. Let's not even franchise tag him. Just let him go, man. Doubt it, but man, that would be really nice. I mean, you see other organizations out here not playing about their favorite players, signing them long term and things like that, big money contracts as soon as possible, all of that type of stuff, even like a year early sometimes with a lot of these face of the franchise guys. Meanwhile, Brian Burns was just recently informed that they're not even talking to him, and it's early March. Free agency starts in a week. technically legal tampering period March 11th. So I feel like that's at least somewhat of a loose deadline for them to figure out what's going on with this Brian Burns situation. But for them to say as of yesterday they're not even talking to him, I doubt anything happens before March 11th. And I know he has to be absolutely livid about that, because if you're Brian Burns, if you're going to become a free agent, you would prefer to be an immediate free agent as of March 11th, so you can go out there and potentially get the next big contract, and you have a bigger market available. Whereas if the Panthers keep stalling and waiting and who knows what's going on, then this thing could get ugly for Brian Burns, because other teams like the Commanders can be like, man, Panthers BSing with the whole Brian Burns situation. We're just going to go ahead and get a guy like Jonathan Grenard from the Texans or Bryce Huff from the Jets. And now we no longer need Brian Burns, which eliminates a team from the market that wants Brian Burns. And if it limits his market, maybe that's a way that the Panthers could just on the slick be really petty and really evil and make it towards they force Brian Burns to return to the Panthers, because they're going to be like, well, now it's like March 15th and every other team that needed an edge rusher already signed their guy. Nobody needs an edge rusher that bad. You might as well come on back for less money. Free agency gets really ugly, man. The money and the business side of the football gets really ugly and petty, man. It's really bad. And boy, I feel sorry for these players sometimes, man. But Joe Pearson tweeted out and did like a whole breakdown on the several factors that have complicated the Brian Burns negotiations with the Panthers, including details of the Rams' massive trade offer becoming public. Can the Panthers restructure front office, get a deal done with the Pro Bowl pass rusher? And all of this is coming from February 22nd. So let's dive into this and take a look at some really interesting things that this guy, Joseph Pearson, brings up in his article from The Athletic. He said, what were and are the sticking points to negotiations? When the specifics of the Rams offer 2 future first-round picks in the 2023 second-rounder became public, it strengthened Brian Burns' position because he and his camp knew Fitterer had turned down a massive haul. When the Panthers wouldn't budge off their number, the contract talks ended and Brian Burns played the 2023 season on his 5th-year option worth $16 million. And he definitely deserved to be paid more than that annually. The 25-year-old did not have his best season as he played through injuries and saw his sack total dip to 8. His lowest since his rookie season. Still good though, better than anything us Commanders had. So I'm very optimistic that he will not have a down season like that again, especially if he stays healthy. It didn't help that the Panthers didn't hold a fourth quarter lead in any of their 17 games. Burns conceded the contract talks and injuries to him, and defensive teammates like Shaq Thompson and J.C. Horn weighed on him. Quote, dealing with injury, a lot of things play in your head. I dealt with a lot of stuff mentally and emotionally, but I think it's going to make me stronger, unquote. So basically, this has been a very difficult time with him. And you also got to remember that he played off of his 5th-year option last year, which isn't necessarily like a franchise tag, but it kind of is, because you could have just gone ahead and given him a big, long-term, more money per year contract right there. But they were like, hey, man, 5th-year contract, according to the NFL, we only got to pay you $16 million. It's out of our hands. It's just take it to the NFL, not us Panthers. And it's kind of like a petty way to kind of get away with only paying him $16 million when he was really owed somewhere probably in the $20 millions already at that point. But they could just be like, hey, man, rules is rules type of situation. It's just super petty. Panthers, man, y'all doing him wrong, man. Y'all supposed to try to take care of your homegrown talent that you drafted yourself. But then again, I guess technically it was a previous regime, so maybe they don't value him as much as the people that actually drafted him do, but who knows? So the article goes on to say, so what's the most likely outcome? One wild card in Brian Burns' situation is that Fitterer, who held on to the 2019 first rounder from Florida State tightly with both hands, is now gone. But new GM Dan Morgan was Fitterer's assistant GM the past 3 years, like I already talked about. It's hard to envision Morgan, a former Panthers linebacker and first round pick, letting a talented young defensive player leave the organization, especially considering what the Panthers already passed up on to keep Burns in the fold. It seems likely the Panthers will place a tag on Burns. The sides can then continue to talk to see if they can find a middle ground later on after he's franchise tagged. So that sounds like what's more than likely going to happen. We're going to see what happens. And also, I think it's really interesting because He also reported in this article that the Washington Commanders inquired about Brian Burns last year and then also traded away Montez Sweat and Chase Young at the trade deadline. So we were interested in Brian Burns maybe even before we traded away Chase Young and Montez Sweat. Now, after trading them, I'm pretty sure the interest has increased mightily. Now, of course, that was also the previous regime. That was Rivera, Martin Mayhew, and those guys. That wasn't necessarily Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, and all of these guys, Joe Witt Jr. But still, man, the fact that we were interested in him before we even actually physically traded those guys away, and then now after trading those guys away, I'm pretty sure that interest is only strengthened. And then also, lastly, from this article, another point I want to talk about: would there be a market for Brian Burns in a tag and trade situation, scenario type of thing? And then in the article, he says, absolutely. Burns was ranked number 1 among all free agents by the Athletics' Randy Mueller, a longtime NFL executive who was the GM for the Seattle Seahawks, New Orleans Saints, and Miami Dolphins. He said, quote, Brian Burns fits all of the criteria teams look for in a free agency: age, athletic ability, and all-around game. His production was limited somewhat by the Panthers scheme, but his suddenness and pass rush package should translate to higher volume production. Offenses must have a game plan to deal with his ability each week, unquote. And again, that's coming from a former GM and NFL executive for 3 other NFL teams doing an article on the top free agents out of this entire free agency class. He has Brian Burns number 1, regardless of position. Not number 1 out of edge rushers, no, number 1, period. So yes, there will be a market out there for a guy like that. ESPN's Adam Schefter reported at least 5 teams asked the Panthers about Burns' availability before last year's trade deadline. Again, before we even traded away Chase Young and Montez Sweat, and then especially afterwards. The list included the Jacksonville Jaguars, who already have Josh Allen and my Georgia Bulldog, Travon Walker. So chill out, man. Y'all don't even need him. But maybe y'all are thinking maybe that's a sign that maybe they will not bring back Josh Allen to whatever money they want. Maybe they'll let Josh Allen walk and then they'll try to get Brian Burns. That's really interesting, because as long as the Commanders end up with either of them, I'm very happy. So if it takes the Jaguars to take Brian Burns off the market so that we can get Josh Allen, then do that. Even though I really want Brian Burns, I just want one of the two, please. Also, the Atlanta Falcons, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Washington Commanders also inquired about Brian Burns last fall, a league source told The Athletic. While it's unlikely the Panthers will get anything closely approaching the Rams' offer from 2022, one veteran front office executive believes teams will be willing to give up 1 first-round pick and a package for Burns. Hey, man, so you sign them to the franchise tag, which we'll talk about what that exact number is, and then potentially a team has to give up a first to get them. I know we wouldn't give up our first this year. I highly doubt that. With the number 2 overall pick, now maybe you could take that 2025 first, but I doubt the Commanders give up a first round pick for that. Maybe they try to make up in value with a first round pick, maybe both of our seconds in return for Brian Burns in a sign and trade. Who knows? Now, before we dive into how much money he's potentially going to get in the market, we're going to take a look at his market value. We're going to take a look at how much he will cost in a tag and trade, not even just from the Panthers' point of view, if they franchise tag him and keep him and don't sign him long term, and they just choose to let him play on that this year, or us as the Commanders, if they the Panthers end up franchise tagging him and then we trade for him, say for like 2 seconds or something like that, how much would he cost us against the cap? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Of course, also his market value and things like that. And then of course, we're also going to take a look at our cap space to see how much we have to spend to see if we can get him. But first of all, how much do the Commanders actually need an edge rusher like Brian Burns? How bad is it? And boy, let me tell you, I've talked about this in previous videos and live streams like the past month, and it's worse than a lot of people probably think. Because if you're looking at our edge rusher position right now, we literally on roster right now only have 2 playable guys in KJ Henry and Andre Jones at the edge rusher position, who are both rookies from last year, a 5th round rookie and a 7th round rookie from the 2023 NFL draft. And both of those guys did not play enough for me to be confident in their ability to start this upcoming season. Maybe KJ Henry. But even then, even if KJ Henry, say best case scenario, is actually a really good edge rusher, and that's a big if, we still need a guy opposite of him, because again, all you have after that is Andre Jones, and then I guess Jalen Harris and Joshua Pryor. I mean, maybe David Bada, but he's more of an interior defensive lineman if you ask me. And then outside of that, remember Casey Toohill, James Smith-Williams, F.A. Obata, and then even Abdullah Anderson, who's like a defensive tackle edge rusher tweener, even if you want to count him, are all unrestricted free agents. So if you do want to start them next year, which, I mean, that's not a very high ceiling start right there. That's a nice, I think those guys are nice depth pieces, but I wouldn't sign them to come in and start you, even if you were to bring those guys back, which may not be as easy as people think with them being unrestricted free agents, and maybe they want to go elsewhere instead of staying to play for the Commanders. No matter, even if we offer them a good amount of money, then maybe they would prefer to take that same exact money per year with another team. You just never know. But even if, say best case scenario, we do sign those guys back on cheap deals, I don't love them enough to have them as starters for next year. KJ Henry, Casey Toohill, and James Smith-Williams, and then FL Bottas coming off of IR. Us going into this season assuming that they are our starters is very dangerous, especially with the play style that Joe Witt Jr. coming here to be our defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn coming here to be our head coach, both from the Cowboys. The way that the Cowboys played defense last year was very aggressive. Deron Bland, as a 5th-round rookie, led the NFL, set a record in pick sixes in a season. And that's because of the constant, consistent, and deadly pass rush that they were able to present, led by Micah Parsons, but also a nice group of defensive linemen. I already talked about how we need to go steal one of those guys, and it's not Micah Parsons or DeMarcus Lawrence, man. I'm talking about Dorrance Armstrong. Go check him out because he's an unrestricted free agent. Maybe we could try to steal him. Instead of him re-signing with the Cowboys, we could bring him. That would be a really nice, cheaper, but higher ceiling, best days ahead of him type of option. They already did like a breakdown on him, some stats and things like that, why he would be a great free agency signing in another video. Go check that out. But back to my main point, the Cowboys had a deadly pass rush with at least 3 really good, you would argue, pass rushers, and that's what allowed their corners and DBs in general to be that aggressive, to be able to get pick sixes, which if we would have tried to do that here, as of right now, we don't have the edge rushers to do that. I mean, Emmanuel Forbes, he set like a record in college for interceptions and things like that and pick sixes. He can literally be like a more talented, naturally talented DeRon Bland. There's a reason Emmanuel Forbes went in the 1st round and DeRon Bland went in the 5th. So the natural talent is there for Forbes. He just needs a better scheme, a better defense around him. And I feel like Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. can get that out of him and make him look like a 1st round pick that he was supposed to be. But it's going to take an elite pass rush to do that. And as of right now, where things stand, the Commanders do not have that. So yes, we really need edge rusher right now so that this defense can work the way that Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. want it to work. Now, of course, tackle is a big need for us even before we cut Charles Leno. Now you can argue it's even bigger now. Then you also have cornerback, because who knows if we even bring back Kendall Fuller, and even if we do, I'm still not absolutely sure about that. Then tight end, we already had a need there, and then you cut Logan Thomas, who was technically your tight end 1 last year when healthy. And then you could also argue that maybe like franchise quarterback and things like that, maybe you want to go quarterback number 2 overall. But at the very least, for some of those positions, you have some like at least potential there, some bodies. Tackle, I mean, I don't love Trent Scott as a starter, and I also don't love Andrew Wiley as a starter. But, you know, there's somebody there, technically. And same thing with corner. We have guys. Tight end, we have potential. Armani Rogers, Cole Turner, and John Bates. And then franchise quarterback, Sam Howell. When in doubt, if you have to run it back with them, that's not the worst idea in the world. But edge rusher? It's literally nobody playable, in my opinion. After you, even again, best case scenario, KJ Henry is starting on one side. Please tell me who's starting on the other. Because at the very least, maybe on, again, going back to tackle, maybe you re-sign Cornelius Lucas, I guess, for really cheap. When in doubt, he could start. Or even, I think Trent Scott even started like a game or 2 last year and wasn't bad. But edge rusher, Armani Rogers is right now our starting other edge rusher right now. Edge rusher is arguably our biggest need, very biggest need. So now that we know that the Commanders are desperate for edge rusher help, and of course with us having the number 2 overall pick, more than likely taking quarterback in this upcoming draft, so the best chance that you can get at an edge rusher in the draft is 2nd round at the earliest, unless you take both of our seconds and trade back up into the 1st. But even then, even say best case scenario, we find a way to have like Darius Robinson slide down to our 2nd round pick, I would still feel like we needed to sign a guy like Brian Burns in free agency before that even happened. And that's, I'm giving y'all a bunch of best case scenarios for the Commanders. And even then, in those best case scenarios, I still feel like we need to do whatever it takes to get a Brian Burns, Josh Allen, Bryce Huff, Jonathan Grenard, one of those guys. But either way, going back to Brian Burns, franchise tag wise, For defensive ends, it would be a $21.324 million cap hit this season. Because remember, after the cap space went up and now that we have the official numbers for cap space for the entire NFL, those franchise tags numbers went up. Originally, defensive end was what, like 20 million? Now it's almost 22. And then linebacker had a $22.7 million projection, and then now it's officially 24 million. But let me break down why he's projected to actually be more of a linebacker money-wise than defensive end. Burns played mostly defensive end since entering the league in 2019, but the collective bargaining agreement states that a player's tag category is determined on where he played the most snaps the previous season specifically. That's it. So that means that Brian Burns would be considered more of a linebacker after being lined up as an outside linebacker in the 3-4 scheme installed by defensive coordinator Ejiro Evero. So again, going back to the franchise tag, looking at linebackers, he would be $24 million against the cap this year as a franchise tag. So assuming that his yearly value that he's potentially asking for in a new contract will be somewhere around there, which I highly doubt. That's best case scenario. That's thinking very optimistically about it. Maybe it even starts there as a minimum is what I feel like. Spotrac has their own calculations based on edge rushers with similar production and age. Right now, they have his market value at somewhat less than $22 million per year. They have him getting a 5-year, $108.745 million contract, which would have him at $21.7 million per year in his next contract, which would make him the 5th highest ranked outside linebacker contract wise, and then the 46th highest paid player in the NFL in general. As of right now, he's the 49th highest paid outside linebacker in the NFL because he's still on his rookie deal coming off of his 5th-year option, which makes him the 550th highest paid player out of the entire NFL. So he's trying to go from 49th out of outside linebackers to 5th as far as contract rankings per year value. And then they're also comparing them to like a Myles Garrett. They're comparing them to Nick Bosa, TJ Watt, and Joey Bosa when they come up with that market value. Those are the guys that he's being compared to as far as age, production, value, all of that type of stuff. They literally have a category age when signed. Myles Garrett was 24. Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa were 25, which is like actually really cool. TJ Watt was 26, and their averages is 25, and Brian Burns would be 25 as well, but by the time the season starts, he would actually technically be 26 years old. But I do want to point out the fact that this projected $21.7 million per year by Spotrac is well below what I think he's actually going to get. First of all, it's less than the $24 million franchise tag that he would get. So why is Brian Burns, from your point of view, asked for a long-term contract that would be less than what you could just get paid this year? You bet on yourself, get this $24 million this year rather than $22 million per year. Get 24 this year and then ask for even more the next offseason when you're arguably the best edge rusher available that time as well, and you highly doubt that the Panthers will franchise tag you twice. So I'm thinking that somewhere at $25 million per year is probably the floor in this deal. Again, I don't know how trustworthy it was, but like we said earlier, he reportedly turned down a $27 million per year contract offer by the Panthers. So if he turned that down, then even the $25 million per year that I was hoping for may not be worth it. So Spotrac with their $21.7 million per year seem like they're way out of range for what he's actually willing to offer. That's way too little. So I don't know. This is a really interesting situation. Now, from the Commanders' point of view, we have the most cap space in the NFL. So if anybody can give him what he's asking for, it's us. The problem is literally only the franchise tag. If Brian Burns were for some reason to become an unrestricted free agent, the Panthers end up not franchise tagging him, which I highly doubt happens. But if he does, I easily give us the best chances of getting them, because just simply off of need, demand, and then also the money that we have having the most cap space in the NFL, that's just like the perfect storm for literally Brian Burns to be destined to be a Commander. But again, we have to see if he can get past this franchise tag situation. And hey, man, Brian Burns, if you're listening to me, if you're seeing this video somehow, make it as difficult for the Panthers as possible. Show up to the facilities with no shirt, fat, greasy attitude, like be as difficult as possible. Pull a James Harden, wear the fat suit if you got to. You know what I'm saying? Be as difficult as possible and force them to just be like, man, I can't take it no more. Just this guy is too much. Just release him, man. Don't tag him. Don't nothing. Don't pay him. Just let him go, man. Let him walk. We'll just use that cap space for something else other than this headache. Be a completely disgruntled worker. Just be as ignorant and annoying as possible. Prank call them on the phone every night. Do what you got to do, because the Commanders have the money to give you what you want if you're willing to go through with that. Now, of course, your PR team would absolutely hate you and your whole name would go down the gutter, but nobody would care if you're going out there and getting 15 sacks a season for the Commanders and having a future Hall of Fame career. People are going to completely forget about that. People forget about the fact that I know people talk about Caleb Williams being this whole red flags guy and character concerns with him potentially saying that he doesn't want to go to the Bears, but people completely forget about the fact that Eli Manning literally did that and ended up on the Giants because he did that to the Chargers, I believe, and nobody cares. He went on to win Super Bowls, and he was a really good guy with no character concerns throughout his NFL career, to the point that a lot of people probably don't even know, or at the very least forgot, that Eli Manning did something like that. So, hey, man, today's character concerns can easily be tomorrow's forgotten memories, because at the end of the day, it's a what have you done for me lately league, and if you're going out there getting 15 sacks a season for the Commanders, nobody's going to care what you had to do to get out of the Panthers situation at all. You control the narrative, honestly, if you want to. And again, Commanders lead the NFL in cap space according to Spotrac, and they always guess high, whereas over the cap guesses low, so it's really weird. But according to Spotrac, we have $96 million in cap space. The Patriots are second with 91. The Titans are third with 80. And then after that, it's just everybody below 80 million. Nobody else is even close to 100 million like we are. And then the league average is somewhere around 29 million right now. And below the league average, as far as our division goes, you have the Cowboys 27th with negative cap space. And then slightly above the league average, you have the Giants like right above it with 35, and the Eagles right above that with 39. 15th and 17th in the NFL rankings wise in cap space respectively. And again, we have the most. And then even if you want to be petty and let's look at the Panthers. The Carolina Panthers are 16th, right in between the Eagles and Giants in cap space with 36 million. So if they feel like they could potentially find a way to sign you long term with $36 million worth of cap space, and Brian Burns' franchise tag does not count against that. So you sign Brian Burns to his franchise tag, they only have 12 million after that. Whereas we have 96, 3 times as much as what they got. So Brian Burns, please, man, hold up your end of the bargain. Force the Commanders, the Panthers, to end up wanting to just release you because you've just been so difficult. Just do the whole James Harden thing if you got to. Even pull a Ben Simmons if you got to. Just be straight ignorant. And then I promise you the Commanders are going to hold up their side of the bargain. I'm pretty sure of that. And then actually, it's pretty crazy too, because I remember back in the draft when Brian Burns was coming out, even though Montez Sweat was from Atlanta, I personally preferred Brian Burns' floor over Montez Sweat's ceiling. Now, I'm still happy that we traded back up into the first round to get Montez Sweat, but now I'm just saying it's crazy because we may end up getting the guy that I originally wanted a few years back, but just a few years later and in his prime. Please, Adam Peters, make it happen. Find a way. If you gotta go on your side and do some things behind the scenes to make the Panthers want to release them, threaten them if you got to. I don't care. Make it happen, man. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. I'm doing more deep dives into free agents like this, so Brian Burns is not the only one we're going to do like this. But then granted, free agency starts in like less than a week, and I still have mock drafts to do and all these other videos to do. I still need to do like a team needs video where I want to rank what are our biggest needs. Of course, edge rusher is going to be number 1, but you may be surprised at what's number 2, number 3, what ends up dead last and things like that. So I still have a whole lot of other content to get to. So, but I do want to focus on players like this. Like maybe we could do like a linebacker next, or maybe like a Tyron Smith from the Dallas Cowboys, the left tackle like this, where we do a full deep dive into how much money they're asking for, how realistic is it that they'll possibly be available for the Commanders to even go get, and how much cap space do the Commanders have compared to his previous team. All that time, just like how we did a full breakdown into this Brian Burns situation, every angle possible. I am thinking about doing that for other free agents. So let me know in the comment section what free agents you would want me to do a full deep dive into like this one. And then also, of course, let me know how you feel about this video itself. How do you feel about all of my points that I brought up? Do you agree or disagree with any of my points? Do you feel like the Commanders should pursue him heavily in free agency? Do you feel like it's even possible that the Commanders will even have a chance chance to get him, if the Panthers will end up franchise tagging him or not, or anything like that. Let me know how you feel about this entire video, and stay tuned for more content. I really appreciate y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.